The hand over my mouth was cold, but the words whispered in my ear were colder. Don't breathe, or they'll hear you. I thought Lucas was just a man who polished my silver until he showed me the empty vials of poison hidden in my husband's desk. Now I have to trust a man I've ignored for years to help me vanish, because if the police find me first, they aren't coming to help, they're coming to finish the job. Would you trust the man you treated like a servant with your life, or would you take your chances with the family trying to bury you? Stick around, because what happens at the 15-minute mark changes everything you know about loyalty. If this story resonates with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, Lucas and I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. You don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The grand dining hall of the Sterling estate was a cathedral of glass and ego. Xanthe sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her vision slightly blurred, a persistent tremor in her hands that she'd chalked up to exhaustion. Across from her, her husband, Julian, and her sister, Beatrice, were laughing over vintage Bordeaux. Lucas moved like a shadow in the periphery. He was a man of quiet strength, his shoulders broad under the crisp black waistcoat of his uniform, his face a mask of professional neutrality. He lived for the moments after his shift when he could go home to Sophie, but here, in this house of gold, he was merely a ghost who served. "Bennett!" Julian's voice sliced through the air like a dull blade. Lucas stopped, the silver water pitcher steady in his hand. "Yes, Mr. Sterling." Julian smirked, leaning back. He looked at Beatrice, then at Xanthe, who was staring blankly at her plate. "I noticed a smudge on the floor in the West Gallery, and your shoes, they're scuffed. It's pathetic, really. Does your little brat at home take up so much of your time that you can't even present yourself with dignity?" Beatrice let out a sharp, tinkling laugh. "It's the breed, Julian. You can put a suit on a commoner, but you can't wash off the struggle." Lucas's jaw tightened, the only sign of the storm brewing inside him. He thought of Sophie's worn-out sneakers and the way she'd hugged him that morning. He couldn't lose this job, not yet. "I apologize, sir. I'll attend to it immediately." "Apologize? No." Julian stood up, his face reddening with a sudden performative rage. He grabbed a bowl of lukewarm vichyssoise. "You're clumsy, you're slow, and frankly, you're an eyesore." With a sudden, violent movement, Julian tipped the bowl over Lucas's polished shoes and the hem of his trousers. The creamy soup splashed against the expensive rug and Lucas's shins. Xanthe blinked, trying to focus. "Julian, that's enough. He's a servant, Xanthe, and he's a bad one," Julian snapped, then turned back to Lucas with a sadistic glint in his eye. "Get on your knees, Bennett. Clean it up, right now. Use your hands if you have to. Show my wife how humble you really are." The room went silent. The other staff members looked away, faces pale. Lucas felt the heat of humiliation crawling up his neck. He looked at Julian, the man who had married into Xanthe's fortune and now treating a human being like a dog. Lucas's eyes then flickered at Xanthe. She looked pale, her skin almost translucent, a far cry from the vibrant woman he'd seen in the news months ago. If you were in Lucas's shoes, would you swallow your pride for your child, or would you take your chances with the family trying to bury you? Stick around, because what happens at the 15-minute mark changes everything you know about loyalty. Lucas slowly lowered himself. His knees hit the hard floor. He began to wipe the soup with a linen cloth, his motions methodical and dignified despite the degradation. He didn't look up, but he felt Xanthe's eyes on him, not with cruelty, but with a flickering, confused pity. "Good man," Julian spat, dropping a crumpled napkin on Lucas's head. "At least you know your place." As Lucas cleaned, he noticed something the others didn't. He saw Beatrice discreetly slide a small amber vial back into her clutch after Xanthe took a sip of her water. He saw the predatory glance shared between the husband and the sister. He realized then that the humiliation wasn't just a power trip, it was a distraction. The following evening, Xanthe was supposed to be at a charity gala in the city. However, a wave of nausea so violent had struck her in the back of the limousine that she'd ordered the driver to turn back. Her head throbbed, a dull, rhythmic ache that felt like a poison-tipped needle behind her eyes. She entered the mansion through the side garden entrance, her heels clicking softly on the limestone. The house was unnaturally quiet. As she reached the corridor leading to the grand library, a large, calloused hand suddenly clamped over her mouth, and a powerful arm hooked around her waist, pulling her into the shadows of the linen closet. Xanthe gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She clawed at the arm, her mind racing with thoughts of kidnappers or assassins. "Stay quiet," a low, gravelly voice whispered directly into her ear. It was a voice of absolute command, devoid of the subservience she'd heard the day before. She froze. She recognized that scent: soap, rain, and something faintly like cedar. Lucas. He leaned in closer, his chest a solid wall against her back. "If you make a sound, you won't live to see tomorrow. Do you understand?" Xanthe nodded frantically. Lucas slowly released his hand, but he didn't move away. He peered through the slight crack in the closet door. Xanthe followed his gaze. In the library, Julian and Beatrice were standing by the fireplace. They weren't mourning Xanthe's illness, they were clinking glasses. "How much longer?" Beatrice's voice was cold, stripped of its usual honeyed tone. "The digitalis is slow, Julian. She's starting to look suspicious. People are asking questions about her exhaustion." "The doctor is on the payroll, Bea. Don't worry," Julian replied, his voice dripping with a casual malice that made Xanthe's blood run cold. "A few more doses in her evening tea, and the heart failure will look perfectly natural. By the time the autopsy happens, if I even allow one, the empire will already be under our joint control. We just need her to sign the power of attorney tomorrow morning while she's delirious." Xanthe felt the world tilt. Her husband, her sister, the people she shared her life with were systematically erasing her. She felt her knees buckle, but Lucas's arm tightened around her, holding her upright. He looked down at her, and for the first time, Xanthe didn't see a butler. She saw a man with eyes as sharp as flint, eyes that had seen things far worse than corporate betrayal. Lucas leaned in, his voice a ghost of a sound. "I was a medic in a specialized unit before I had Sophie," he whispered, revealing the secret he'd buried under layers of service and humility. "I've seen this before. They're killing you, Xanthe, and if we stay here, they'll finish the job tonight." Xanthe looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears of shock and betrayal. Why are you helping me, after how they treated you?" Lucas's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of the man who spent his nights reading bedtime stories to a 6-year-old. "I know what it's like to have people try to take everything from you, and because no one deserves to die in a house full of snakes." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, encrypted burner phone. "We're leaving, now. My car is at the service gate. If we go through the kitchen, we can slip out before they finish their toast." Xanthe looked at the library one last time, at the life she thought she had, and then she looked at the man in the scuffed shoes and the stained waistcoat. She took his hand. "Take me away from here," she breathed. The escape was a blur of adrenaline and agonizing physical weakness. Every step felt like Xanthe was wading through waist-deep mercury. As they reached the service gate, the sky finally broke, a torrential downpour lashing against the sprawling estate as if trying to wash away the rot within its walls. "Just a little further," Lucas urged, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm. He had his arm firmly around her waist, practically carrying her weight. But as they reached his beat-up 10-year-old sedan parked near the perimeter, the floodlights of the estate suddenly hissed to life, slicing through the rain. A black SUV, the head of the Sterling security detail, screeched to a halt, blocking the exit. The driver's side window rolled down. It was Miller, a man Julian had hand-picked. "Bennett, where do you think you're taking them, madam? Mr. Sterling says she's had a breakdown and needs her medication." Xanthe shivered, her fingers digging into Lucas's damp coat. "Lucas, they won't let us go." Lucas didn't flinch. He stood tall, his frame shielded Xanthe from the blinding lights.
The humble butler persona was gone, replaced by a man whose posture screamed tactical readiness. "She's going to a real hospital, Miller. Move the vehicle." "I don't take orders from the help," Miller sneered, stepping out of the SUV. He was a large man, reaching for the holster at his hip. "Give her to me, or this ends very badly for you and your kid." At the mention of Sophie, something in Lucas's eyes changed, a cold, terrifying stillness. Before Miller could draw, Lucas moved. It was a blur of efficiency. He pivoted, his hand catching Miller's wrist with a sickening crack, disarming him in one fluid motion. He followed with a palm strike to the chest that sent the larger man reeling back into the SUV. "I'm not the help tonight," Lucas growled, his voice vibrating with a hidden history. He didn't wait for a recovery. He shoved Xanthe into the passenger seat of his sedan and jumped behind the wheel. The engine roared to life with a desperate whine. Lucas slammed the car into reverse, swerving around the SUV, the tires screaming against the wet pavement. Through the rearview mirror, Xanthe saw the front doors of the mansion fly open. Julian and Beatrice appeared on the portico, silhouettes of malice against the golden light of the foyer. Julian was shouting, his face contorted in a mask of rage, pointing toward the receding car. "He's calling the police," Xanthe gasped, clutching her stomach as the poison flared again. "He owns the commissioner, Lucas. They'll say I kidnapped you." "Let him try," Lucas said, his hands steady on the wheel as they tore down the dark, winding road away from the estate. He reached over, his large hand briefly covering hers. His skin was warm, a startling contrast to the icy betrayal she'd just left behind. "You're safe now, Lucas. I'm taking you to the one place they'd never think to look, my world." As the lights of the Sterling estate faded into the mist, Xanthe felt a strange, terrifying sensation. For the first time in 10 years, she was nobody. And for the first time in her life, she was actually being protected.
The apartment was small, smaller than Xanthe's walk-in closet. The air smelled of lemon floor cleaner and toasted bread, a humble scent that felt more welcoming than the sterile, sandalwood-scented halls of her mansion. Lucas had tucked Xanthe into a narrow bed in the only bedroom, covering her with a handmade quilt that had seen better decades. Through the thin door, Xanthe listened to the muffled sounds of a life she had never known. "Daddy, you're late," a small, sleepy voice whispered. "I know, Soph. I had to help a friend," Lucas's voice replied, honey-thick with a tenderness that Xanthe hadn't known he possessed. "Is she sick? Like Mommy was?" There was a long silence. Xanthe held her breath, her heart aching in her chest. "She's just tired, Peanut. She needs a safe place to rest. Now go back to sleep. I'll make you your favorite oatmeal in the morning." Xanthe closed her eyes, a single tear escaping. In her world, friends were strategic alliances, and family were business partners who poisoned your tea. Here, in a room where the wallpaper was peeling at the corners, there was a wealth she couldn't buy with her billions. A few minutes later, the door creaked open. Lucas entered, carrying a steaming mug and 2 slices of slightly burnt toast on a mismatched plate. He moved with a quiet grace, mindful of the small space. "It's not 5-star, Lucas said softly, sitting on a wooden chair by the bed, "but the tea is clean. I made it myself. No additives." Xanthe sat up slowly, the quilt sliding off her shoulders. She looked at the toast, then at Lucas. "You live like this every day? Working for people like Julian? Just to come back here?" Lucas looked around the room. His eyes landed on a framed drawing Sophie had made, a stick figure man holding a giant heart. "I have everything I need right here, Xanthe. I don't need a golden ceiling to sleep well at night. I just need to know she's fed and safe." He handed her the mug. Their fingers brushed, and Xanthe felt a genuine connection, not the calculated touch of a husband looking for a signature, but the steadying hand of a protector. "I spent my life building an empire," Xanthe whispered, her voice cracking. "I thought I was powerful, but looking at you, at the way your daughter looks at you, I realize I've been a beggar in my own home." Lucas watched her, his expression unreadable but kind. "Power isn't about who you can command, Xanthe. It's about who you can count on when the lights go out."
Xanthe is realizing her life was built on a lie. Have you ever had a moment where you realized what truly matters in life isn't what you own? Share your story below. Xanthe took a sip of the tea. It was cheap, bitter, and the best thing she had ever tasted. She looked at Lucas, really looked at him, and saw the strength in his jaw, the honesty in his weary eyes. For the first time in her life, she wasn't Xanthe Sterling, the billionaire. She was just a woman, hiding in the dark, being kept alive by the only man who asked for nothing in return.
The storm outside had subsided to a dull drizzle, leaving the apartment in a heavy contemplative silence. Xanthe sat at the small kitchen table, her expensive silk dress now stained and wrinkled, looking like a discarded masterpiece in a room full of sketches. Lucas sat opposite her, his large hands wrapped around a glass of water, his gaze fixed on the peeling floral wallpaper. "You said you were a medic," Xanthe began, her voice barely a whisper. "Men with your skills don't usually end up polishing silver for people like Julian. Why are you here, Lucas? Truly?" Lucas looked up, the yellow light catching the rugged lines of his face. "I was part of a search and rescue team, special ops. I spent 10 years in places most people don't want to know exist. I was good at it, saving people in the middle of chaos." He took a slow breath. "But while I was away saving the world, I wasn't here to save my wife." Xanthe leaned in, the air between them thickening. "What happened?" "A hit and run. Simple, random, cruel," Lucas said, his voice devoid of emotion, which made the words hurt more. "I was in a desert 3,000 miles away when Clara died. Sophie was only 2. I realized then that all the heroism in the world didn't mean a damn thing if I wasn't there for the person who actually needed me. I quit the next day. I took a job that allowed me to be invisible, a job that let me pick my daughter up from school every day. I chose to be a servant to ensure she never felt served by a stranger." Xanthe felt a pang of profound guilt. She had spent years treating her staff like furniture, never wondering what wars they had fought before entering her foyer. "And you?" Lucas asked, his eyes piercing through her corporate armor. "What made you so cold that you didn't see your own sister holding a knife to your back?" Xanthe looked down at her trembling hands. "My father. He didn't raise daughters, he raised successors. His first lesson to me was, a leader has no friends, only competitors. When he died, he left the empire to me, not Beatrice. I thought I was protecting her by giving her a life of luxury. I thought Julian loved me because I was the only person who could challenge him." I let out a hollow laugh. "I built a fortress of glass, Lucas. I was so busy looking at the view from the top that I didn't realize the foundation was made of sand." "They didn't just want your money, Xanthe," Lucas said softly. "They wanted to break you. People like Julian, they hate what they can't control." "I was a fool," she whispered. "No," Lucas countered, reaching across the table to steady her hand. His touch was firm, grounding her. "You were a woman who wanted to believe she was loved. That's not a weakness, it's a target." In that moment, the distance between the billionaire and the butler vanished. They were just 2 people who had survived different kinds of battlefields, both carrying the scars of a world that took more than it gave. Xanthe looked at their joined hands, his calloused and strong, hers pale and shaking, and for the first time in years she felt the flicker of something she had long ago deemed a liability: hope. The next morning, the sun didn't glare off the glass skyscrapers of the financial district. It crept softly into the apartment, filtered through mismatched curtains. Xanthe woke up not to the chime of a digital assistant, but to the sound of a 6-year-old's giggles and the rhythmic thwack, thwack of a whisk against a bowl. She stepped out of the bedroom, wearing one of Lucas's oversized gray hoodies. It swamped her frame, but the heavy cotton felt like armor. "You're awake," Lucas said, looking up from the stove. He looked rugged in the morning light, his hair slightly sleep-tossed. "Sophie was convinced you were a sleeping princess." I'm just a woman with a headache. Xanthe managed a small smile. She looked at Sophie, who was sitting at the table, surrounded by crayons. Do you want to help? Sophie asked, holding up a blue crayon. Daddy is making surprise pancakes. They're a surprise because sometimes they're burned. Lucas let out a short, genuine laugh. Hey, watch it, Peanut. Xanthe sat down, feeling a strange, fluttery sensation in her chest. She had closed billion-dollar deals without a tremor, but as Sophie handed her a coloring book, her hand shook. I'd love to help. For the next hour, the billionaire CEO wasn't thinking about stock prices or poison. She was learning how to flip a pancake under Lucas's patient tutelage. Too much wrist, he murmured, stepping behind her to adjust her grip on the spatula. His chest brushed her shoulder, and for a second, the world narrowed down to the heat of the stove and the steady presence of him. Xanthe felt her breath hitch. She looked up, and for a heartbeat, their eyes locked. There was no sir or madam here, just a man and a woman in a kitchen that was too small for the feelings filling it. I've never had a morning like this, Xanthe whispered, the subtext of her confession hanging heavy. I've never been happy like this. It's the best kind, Lucas replied, his voice low and vibrating. Xanthe is finding peace in a simple life she once looked down upon. If you lost everything tomorrow, but had the people you loved, do you think you could be truly happy? Tell us why in the comments. They ate together on the small balcony, the city humming below them. Xanthe watched Lucas wipe a stray drop of syrup from Sophie's chin. The tenderness of the gesture moved her more than any diamond necklace ever had. I have to go back, Xanthe said suddenly, her voice turning sharp with a new resolve. They think I'm dead or dying. They're going to announce the merger tonight at the foundation gala. If I don't stop them, they win. Lucas set his coffee down. The soft dad energy vanished, replaced by the steel-eyed soldier. We go back, but not as a victim and a butler. We go back on your terms. They have the police, the security, the money, she reminded him. I have the truth, and I have a set of skills Julian Sterling isn't prepared for. For a moment, class differences didn't exist. They were a team. Xanthe reached across the table and squeezed his hand. The bond was fragile, born in the wreckage of her old life, but it felt stronger than anything she had ever known.
The sanctuary didn't fall with a whisper. It fell with a crash. The front door of the apartment was kicked off its hinges just as Lucas was handing Sophie her backpack. Tactical teams swarmed the small space, the red dots of laser sights dancing across the kitchen table. Xanthe was shoved against the wall, her heart hammering as she saw Julian and Beatrice step through the dust and splinters, accompanied by the police commissioner. "Xanthe, thank God you're alive!" Beatrice cried, though her eyes were cold as ice. Julian stepped forward, looking like the grieving, heroic husband. "I knew this animal kidnapped you. Bennett, you're done." Lucas was pinned against the floor, a knee in his back, his face pressed against the linoleum. Sophie was screaming, her small hands clutching her father's shirt, until a female officer gently pulled her away. "I didn't kidnap her," Lucas gasped, his voice muffled. "I saved her from you." "Save her?" Julian laughed, a dark, jagged sound. He turned to Xanthe, who was trembling, her mind reeling from the sudden chaos. "Xanthe, darling, he didn't save you. He was the one who contacted us." Julian pulled a thick folder from his breast pocket and tossed it onto the kitchen table. "He's been playing you. Lucas Bennett contacted my sister weeks ago. He knew you were being poisoned because he's the one who suggested the dosage. He was a medic, wasn't he? He knew exactly how to make it look like a heart condition." Xanthe shook her head, her voice a mere croak. "No, he wouldn't." "He wanted a payout," Beatrice added, stepping closer. "He told us he'd find you and keep you hidden until we signed over a percentage of the merger profits to an offshore account in his name. Look at the bank statements, Xanthe. There was a transfer of $50,000 to his account just yesterday." Xanthe's eyes fell on the papers. There it was, Lucas's name,
a transfer from a shell company linked to her conglomerate, the exact amount needed for Sophie's private tuition and a better life. She looked at Lucas. He was looking up at her, his eyes pleading, but he didn't deny the money. How could he? The proof was right there, curated by people who owned the banks. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice breaking, Did you know about the poison before you saved me?" Lucas looked at her, his jaw tight. "Xanthe, they framed that transfer. I never saw that money. You know me. You know what we shared these last 2 days." "I don't know anything," Xanthe screamed, the trauma of the past week finally snapping her. "I thought you were the only real thing in my life, and you're just another person trying to sell me." "Get him out of here," Julian commanded. As the officers hauled Lucas away, he didn't fight. He only looked at Sophie, who was being led out the door. Then he turned his gaze back to Xanthe. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound, hollow disappointment that shattered her more than the betrayal itself. "I never wanted your money, Xanthe," he said softly as they dragged him into the hall. "I just wanted you to live." Xanthe stood in the center of the ruined apartment, surrounded by the family who had poisoned her and the heroes who had rescued her, feeling more alone than she had ever been in her life. The silence that followed was the loudest sound she had ever heard. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of black ties and silk gowns. The Sterling Foundation Gala was in full swing, but tonight's celebration had a dark undercurrent. Giant digital screens displayed Xanthe's face, captioned with "A Legacy in Transition." Julian stood at the podium, a black armband on his sleeve, the picture of a grieving, devoted husband. Beatrice sat in the front row, dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. "My wife, Xanthe, has always been the heart of this company." Julian's voice boomed through the speakers, dripping with manufactured sorrow. "But, as many of you know, her health has taken a tragic turn. Tonight, with a heavy heart, I am here to announce that she has signed over full control of the Sterling Empire to myself and her sister, Beatrice, so she can focus on her recovery in a private facility." The room erupted in murmurs. Julian picked up a pen, ready to sign the final merger documents on a live feed. "I wouldn't pick up that pen if I were you, Julian." The voice wasn't weak, it didn't tremble. It was a cold, melodic bell that silenced the entire ballroom. The heavy oak doors at the back of the hall swung open. Xanthe stepped into the light. She wasn't the pale, trembling ghost they had dragged out of the apartment. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue, her hair slicked back, her eyes burning with a terrifying, righteous clarity. Julian's face went from pale to ashen. "Xanthe, darling, you're delirious. The doctors said—" "The doctors you paid?" Xanthe walked down the center aisle, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked straight at the man who had tried to kill her. "The ones who helped you and Beatrice lace my tea with digitalis for 6 months?" "This is madness!" Beatrice stood up, her voice screeching. "Security! My sister is having a breakdown!" "Security is busy," a familiar, deep voice echoed from the balcony. Xanthe looked up. Standing by the tech booth was Lucas. He wasn't in a butler's uniform. He was in a dark, well-fitted suit, his arms crossed, looking every bit the commander he used to be. Beside him was an officer from the Internal Affairs Division. "You see, Julian," Xanthe said, reaching the stage and leaning into the microphone, "you forgot one thing. You tried to frame a man who specializes in surveillance and rescue. While you were busy rescuing me from his apartment, Lucas was busy extracting the digital trail of that $50,000 transfer you sent to yourself from a shell company." With a nod from Lucas, the giant screens behind the stage flickered. The tribute to Xanthe vanished. In its place, a video began to play. It was the library footage, the recording Lucas had captured using a microcam he'd planted when he was cleaning the library the night of the humiliation. The ballroom gasped as Julian's voice filled the room. A few more doses in her evening tea, and the heart failure will look perfectly natural. Julian lunged for Xanthe, his face a mask of primal rage. "You bitch! I built this!" Before his hand could even reach her, a shadow blurred across the stage. Lucas didn't just intercept him, he neutralized him with a single expert takedown, pinning Julian's face against the very mahogany podium he had just used to lie to the world. "Don't touch her," Lucas growled, his voice a low, dangerous promise. The doors burst open again, not with Julian's paid security, but with the state police. As the handcuffs clicked around Julian's and Beatrice's wrists, the room was a storm of camera flashes. Beatrice was screaming, blaming Julian, while Julian remained deathly silent, staring at the floor. Xanthe stood at the edge of the stage, breathing in the air of a free woman. She looked at Lucas. He didn't move toward her, he simply gave her a short, respectful nod, the look of a man who had completed his mission. He began to walk away, heading towards the exit where Sophie was waiting. "Lucas, wait!" Xanthe's voice rang out, stopping him at the door. The gala was still a hive of chaos behind them, but as Xanthe caught up to Lucas on the grand stone steps of the plaza, the world felt remarkably quiet. Lucas stood by the curb, holding Sophie's hand. He had his old, worn jacket over his arm, looking like a man who was ready to return to the shadows of a quiet life. "Lucas!" Xanthe called out, her voice echoing off the marble. He turned, his expression guarded but soft when he saw her. He looked at her midnight blue gown, then at the cameras still flashing in the distance. "The police have the statement, Xanthe. The board of directors is already calling emergency meetings. You should go back inside. They need their CEO." Xanthe walked down the steps until she was standing directly in front of him. She looked down at his shoes, the same ones Julian had mocked. They were scuffed, but they had walked through fire to keep her safe. "I don't care what they need," Xanthe said, her voice steady and warm. "I've spent 10 years building a world that tried to kill me the moment I showed a spark of vulnerability. I don't want to be the woman in that building anymore." Lucas tilted his head, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Who do you want to be?" Xanthe reached up, unpinning the $1,000,000 diamond brooch from her shoulder. She looked at it for a moment, then handed it to a passing valet, who looked stunned. "I want to be the woman who knows what surprise pancakes taste like. I want to be the woman who doesn't have to check her tea for poison because she knows the man standing next to her would die before letting her come to harm." She looked at Sophie, who was watching her with wide, curious eyes. Xanthe knelt down so she was eye level with the little girl. "Sophie, would it be all right if I came over for breakfast again? I promise not to burn the pancakes this time." Sophie's face lit up like a sunbeam. She looked at her father, then back at Xanthe, and threw her small arms around Xanthe's neck. "Only if you help me color the dragon." Lucas reached out, his hand resting gently on Xanthe's shoulder. The touch wasn't one of a servant to a master, it was the touch of a partner. "You're giving up a lot, Xanthe. The press will have a field day. They'll say you've lost your mind." "No," Xanthe whispered, standing up to face him, her eyes bright with a peace she had never known. "For the first time in my life, I've actually found it. I'm stepping down, Lucas. I'm putting the company in a trust and starting a foundation for families like yours, families who have the heart but not the help. And I'd like you to run it with me." Lucas looked at her, searching her face for any sign of hesitation. He found only ironclad resolve and a blooming affection. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers for a brief, sacred second. "I'm not a CEO, Xanthe." "You're a man of honor, Lucas Bennett. That's a much rarer title." As they walked toward his old sedan, leaving the lights of the high society world behind, the camera panned up toward the city skyline. "They say wealth is measured by what you have in the bank, but as the sun rises on a new day, I realize that true power isn't found in a skyscraper or a signature. It's found in the quiet strength of a man who stands his ground, the laughter of a child who feels safe, and the courage of a woman who realizes that a humble home filled with truth is worth more than a palace built on lies." Sometimes you have to lose an empire to find a kingdom. Xanthe climbed into the passenger seat of the rusted sedan, looking at the man behind the wheel not as her savior, but as her future. The car pulled away from the curb, disappearing into the heart of the city, not toward a mansion, but toward home. Xanthe chose love and truth over billions and betrayal. If you had to choose between a lonely life of luxury or a difficult life filled with genuine love, which path would you take? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching another story of Lucas Bennett to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as wild and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So like the video and subscribe for more, because Lucas and I will be waiting for you tomorrow.